Hello, welcome back to my channel and welcome to this week's video where I'm gonna be telling you about my favorite and least favorite books I read in 2024. So I'm gonna be starting with my least favorite books and I'm gonna be talking about 5 books. And actually this year I was very lucky to not have read many books that I really disliked. So I'm very happy about that. And then I'm actually going to be talking about 3 books that were not like my least favorite, but I expected to love and I didn't. So they were like disappointing to me. And then finally, like I wanted to talk about 5 books that were my favorite because I'm going to be talking about 5 books that were my least favorite, but I couldn't decide between 2, so I'm actually going to be talking about 6 books that were my favorites. But starting off with my least favorites, the first book that I'm going to be talking about is When Beauty Tamed the Beast, which is romance and historical, which are 2 genres that I don't really like, but this was one of the books that I read for my annual romance video that were chosen by my bestie for me to read, and this was the one that I liked the least out of the 4 books that she chose for me because, like I said, I don't like either romance or historical. So, it was a recipe for disaster. And basically, we're following Lynette, and she, like, people thought that she was pregnant from like a dress that she was wearing, and it made her look pregnant. And also because she was seen kissing the prince, so people assumed that she was pregnant. And so her father decided to marry her to like a rich guy that can't have children. And she goes to his house, and we also like follow him, and he's called Pierce, and he's a doctor. And basically, as soon as she gets to his house, he knows that she's not pregnant, and neither of them really want to get married, but obviously they fall in love. And I didn't really like the way that they flirted, and like the steamy scenes I thought were really cringy, and like the first one gave me the ick, so like every interaction between them after that I just hated. And there was like no plot other than the romance to keep me, engaged, interested. So I was just really bored. And yeah, it was really like not my thing, which I didn't expect it to be, and neither did my friend. But yeah, I read it and I definitely did not like it. The next book was Dear Laura, and this was a horror book. And we're following Laura, and she starts getting letters from X, who says that like they know where her friend Bobby is, and Bobby had gone missing like 30 years before. And then X starts asking things from Laura, like underwear and like her teeth. And like I wasn't really that interested, that invested, and I didn't really care about Laura, so I wasn't really caring that much. But at the same time, it made me like very uncomfortable, not in the way that I like to feel uncomfortable in horror books. And yeah, it wasn't fun, and like it was creepy, but not in the way that I wanted it to be creepy. So yeah, I didn't like it. This one definitely didn't work for me, and also it was like pretty short, so I can't talk much about it, like more than what I've already said. It didn't work for me, and I did not enjoy this one either. And then the next one is another horror book, which is Winterset Hollow. And in that one, we're following a character that had like his favorite book was called Winterset Hollow. And so he and 2 of his friends, I think 2 friends, they go on like a trip that is to the place where the book is supposedly set, and where like the author had a house. And while they're there, they, like he and his friends and like the whole group that was on that trip, they find the house that is supposedly where the author lived, and then they find a rabbit, and the rabbit talks. And that rabbit is like the main character of the book, because the book was about like a bunch of animals that talked and like acted human like they run a house, they cook, they talk, they do, things that humans would do. And so that rabbit invites them into the house, and he meets the other animals. And then he is like out in the garden, I think, and there is an owl that basically warns him that he and his friends are in danger and that he should leave. And basically, they are in fact in danger, and we see them like trying to survive the danger that they're in. And once again, I just didn't connect. I didn't care about the characters. I didn't care that they were in danger. And I was just bored as well with this one. I didn't hate it, but I didn't like it. It was really boring and I just did not have a fun time with it. Next book was Everyone Who Can Forgive Me Is Dead, and this was a mystery thriller. And actually, I decided to read this book not knowing anything about it. I just thought that the title was very intriguing, and so we were following Charlie, and she, when she was in college, she was the only survivor of the Scarlet Christmas. And by being the only survivor, she was also the only witness, and she had actually lied about what happened there. And now, fast forward, she's just, living her life. She actually has a pretty good life. And there is someone who wants to, I think, make a movie about the Scarlet Christmas or a documentary or something. And so Charlie is scared that her secrets will come out. And we are following the two timelines, learning what happened in the past and also Charlie freaking out in the present/future. And once again, I didn't care about her. I was bored. I wasn't connecting. And I've read similar-ish books that were better, as in a character that survived something in the past and now their secrets are being threatened to be exposed. I've read similar books with that concept that were definitely more fun than this one. And since it seemed like something similar to what I've read before, I was waiting to see if the reveal was actually going to shock me and it wasn't going to be exactly what I expected it to be. But it was exactly what I expected it to be. So yeah, it wasn't that fun. I wasn't really thrilled and also didn't really like this one. And finally we have The Visitor, which is another horror book. And I swear that I like horror. I know that I have 3 books in my least favorites that were horror, but I swear that I actually do like horror. But in this one, it was set during Christmas Eve, and there was a really big snowstorm, and the first character that we start following, he crashes his car, and then someone invites him to with him to a diner that is just down the road. And when they get to that diner, there are like 4 or 5 people, I think, that we follow in this story, and they're at the diner, and then some creature, the visitor, starts attacking them and starts hunting them. And the book is basically them trying to survive this visitor that is trying to kill them. And I couldn't have cared less about any of the characters except the dog. And the dog is the only character whose name I remember. I don't remember the name of any of the humans. But out of the humans, I couldn't have cared less about any of them. And I wasn't really creeped out. I wasn't scared. I wasn't really feeling anything. I was just bored and I just didn't care. And it was also pretty short. And even though it was pretty short, I was still bored. So yeah, this one also didn't work for me. And yeah, those were my 5 least favorite books that I've read this year. And now going into my disappointing books. And so these books were disappointing for 2 different reasons. 2 of them were anticipated releases that I have for this year. So obviously I expected to love them and I didn't. And the other wasn't an anticipated release, but was a book that I had read other things from the same universe before that I had really enjoyed. So I expected to still like it because it was following some of the same characters and it was in the same world. So, I still expected to love it. And I also didn't. And so the first one of my disappointing books was Womb City. And this was one of my anticipated releases. And this one was sci-fi horror. And we were following Nayla, and she was living in a body that used to belong to someone else. And there is a whole kind of body hopping thing in this book. And she was controlled by a microchip that she had in her, and she was controlled by the police, including her husband because he was a police officer. And they could control her memories and also her location, but she was controlled by her husband, so obviously it wasn't a good relationship. So she had a lover, and that guy found a way to kind of override the microchip so they could be together. And one night they are like out in their car and they like have an accident, like they run over someone and that someone dies. And then Nayla starts being haunted by that person that they hit with a car. And even like the haunting is not like a typical like ghost kind of haunting of usual horror books. It has like a sci-fi element to it, which like in theory I thought was really interesting. But then like I think the book had a lot of like there was a lot going on that wasn't really explained enough and I was a bit confused, which might have been like my fault and not the book's fault, like for sure. But I also felt like there were some things that were explained over and over and over, and then the things that I wanted explained weren't really explained that well. And I thought that like in theory, like the concept, the ideas were really good, but I didn't really like the execution. And I also thought that it had like very important, discussions, very important conversations. But again, the execution kind of didn't really work for me. I was a little bored. I didn't really connect to the characters. So sadly, I didn't love this one. The next disappointing book was My Darling Dreadful Thing, which was horror. Again, I swear I love horror. There are actually 2 horror books in my favorites, so I swear that I love horror. But yeah, this one was also horror and it was one of my anticipated releases. And in this one, we're following Ross, and she could see ghosts, and she actually had like a ghost that was like bonded to her, and she would perform seances because her mother like wanted to basically earn money by using her. And so she would perform the seances for her mother, and the ghost that she was bonded to would like possess her so she could perform better, I guess. And one night, a woman, I think she was called Agnes, she goes there to the seance because she has just lost her husband and she, wants to communicate with him. And then she meets Ross and she actually wants to take Ross home with her, which Ross is thrilled about because she, like, her life was miserable with her mother. So she would definitely love a way out of her house. So she goes with Agnes, and then we find out that Agnes can also see ghosts, and she also has a ghost bonded to her. And then we have like some sections of the book that are like in the future where Ross is talking to a doctor, and we know that someone has been killed, and Ross is the main suspect, but she claims that like one of the ghosts is actually the one who did it. And obviously, like, the doctor doesn't believe in ghosts, so she has to at the same time prove her innocence and also prove that she's not, crazy, that the ghosts are real. And yeah, we are following kind of the 2 timelines, but it's mostly set like in the like past timeline, and we only get like a few glimpses of that section with her and the doctor. And this book in theory had everything for me to love it. It was kind of gross, it was kind of creepy, it was sapphic, it was everything I should love, but I didn't. And there's like nothing that I can say that I like actively hated about it, but there's nothing that I really loved about it either. Like, I wasn't that excited. I wasn't, again, connecting to the characters or their stories that much. So it was okay, but it was definitely disappointing because I expected to absolutely love it. And then the final disappointing book was King of Scars, which is the first book in this King of Scars duology, but the 6th, I think, in the Grishaverse, which is fantasy. And I had actually seen mixed reviews for this book before reading it, but I had really liked things from this universe before. Like Shadow and Bone, that trilogy was like just okay for me, but I really liked the Six of Crows duology. So, I was excited to read this book because like it follows my favorite character from the Shadow and Bone trilogy, and it also follows a character that I really like from the Six of Crows duology. So I was still excited to read this, despite the mixed reviews that I had read. And I don't really want to spoil what happens in the other 2 series in case you haven't read it before. But basically, you are following 2 characters from the Shadow and Bone trilogy and 1 character from the Six of Crows duology, I think. And like at first, it was really fun to be back in that world, to be back with those characters that I like. But then, like, I kind of got bored I honestly didn't really care about anything that was happening in this book. And like the evil force, the villain that they have to face, like I'm so tired of it. I thought it was gonna be like something completely new, and it was definitely not. And I'm kind of tired of that thing. And like I already had seen the mixed reviews, so like my expectations weren't incredibly high, but it still didn't meet my expectations because it was just boring. I was not really invested in anything that was happening, and like I have no desire to read the second book, which is like the last book. Like on the one hand, I hate leaving things unfinished, like it really bothers me, so I will probably still read that book at some point, but like I'm not really feeling excited to read it. But moving on to better things and moving on to my favorite books of this year. So first up we have Leviathan Falls, which is book 9 in the Expanse series, and it's like the last book, and this is a science fiction series. And without getting into spoilers, basically this series is set in the future in our solar system, but where humans have colonized like other planets. And this series, like every book and like the series as a whole, it has like two main like plot lines happening. There's like a political plot line because there are a lot of tensions among the different like planets where humans live. So there's like that more political side, but there is also a like more like biological threat kind of plot line. And I'm always pretty invested in both of these plot lines. And in this book, it was no exception. Like I was invested from page 1 until page 514. So I was literally invested from the beginning to the end. And, you know, I love these characters so much. So I was so like stressed out because obviously this is the last book in a 9-book series. So things were explosive, things were happening, and I was stressed, but I was also so excited the whole time. Like I had the 5-star feelings for this book the whole time, really, and I just loved it so much. I felt all the feelings, and yeah, I absolutely love it. I mean, this whole series is a 5-star series for me. Not every book has been 5 stars, but like, you know, the series is a 5-star series. Definitely one of my favorite series ever. And so yeah, absolutely loved it. Had a great time. For sure, one of my favorite books of this year. Next book is The Invocations, and this one is fantasy horror. And we follow 3 main characters. So we have at first Zara, and her sister had died a while ago, and she was trying to like learn magic to figure out a way to bring her sister back to life. And then we also have Jude, who after like a deal with a demon has gone wrong, she like her soul is dying, and even like her body is kind of decaying, and things around her are also kind of decaying, and so she also needs a witch to help fix her situation. And then finally we have Emmer, who is a witch, and she sells like bits of magic in exchange for bits of souls, and so she could be the solution to the other 2 characters' problems. And so when they find her, they actually make a deal because Emmer discovers that her clients or like former clients are being killed by someone. And so the other 2 will help her figure out who is doing this and why. And also because now they're her clients, so they might also be on the list of those that are killing those people. And I absolutely love this. Like I loved everything about this book. It was witchy. You know, like the other one that was gory and creepy and sapphic and had everything for me to love it, and I didn't. Well, this one also had everything for me to love it, and I did. And I absolutely loved everything. And I was so invested, and I loved all of the characters. And there was also like a subtle romance subplot that I actually like, which is rare. But yeah, I absolutely loved it, and it really, really worked for me. It was definitely my kind of book. And yeah, obsessed from page 1 until the last one as well. And this one was also an anticipated release, so you know, this one I anticipated to love, and I actually love. And speaking of books that I anticipated to love, and I did, we have our next favorite book, which is The Mercy of Gods. And this is the first book in the Captives War series. and this is sci-fi, and it's actually from the same authors as The Expanse, which is why it was one of my anticipated releases, because like I hadn't finished that series yet, but like I was, into it, and I knew that I loved it already, so I was pretty sure that I would love these authors' next book and like next series. And yeah, I did absolutely love it. And we start by following a group of scientists, and actually like humans in this series. They live on a planet called Engine, and no one really knows exactly how humans got there, but they live there. And like I said, we start by following a group of scientists, and the main character we follow is called Daffit, and he's part of that group. And also, I appreciated that in this book, there's obviously like the space sci-fi and like space travel sci-fi and all of that I don't really understand, I just accept. But in this case, these scientists, they were talking about molecular biology, and it was like obviously sci-fi molecular biology, so not things that actually happen, at least yet. But it made sense to me because I work in molecular biology, so I could actually really understand this sci-fi, which I did really appreciate. But yeah, they are, we see them working at first, and then people start seeing something approach their planet. And what's approaching their planet is the Carracks, who are like conquerors of the universe, and they take other alien species as slaves, and they're there to do that same thing to the humans. And so they actually take the top experts in various different fields with them, and our group of scientists are part of those people that they take. And so they take those humans somewhere else, and they give them like challenges. And here, like in the back of the book, in the last line of the synopsis, it says, "Swept up in a conflict beyond his control and vaster than his imagination, Daffit is poised to become humanity's champion and its betrayer." Which sounded super fun. And when we actually got to the betrayal, it was so good. Like, it was even better than what I had expected. Like, it was so, so good, and I loved it. And what I've already learned from like the world and the other species I've loved, but I am still so curious to learn more. And there's also like an enemy of the Carracks that is kind of like working in the shadows. There is also like super interesting, and I am just still so intrigued about everything. And yeah, I absolutely loved it. I can't wait for more books of this series to come out because absolutely loved it. Next up, we have Warbreaker, and this is part of the Cosmere universe, which is fantasy. And in this one, we were following a lot of people, but we started by following Ciri, who was like the youngest of the four like children of a king. And so by being the fourth child, she didn't really have a purpose, I guess, because one of the children was like the heir, the other was like sent to a place of worship, and the other was set to marry the God King from like another kingdom. And so Ciri was just, living her life, loving that she was unimportant. And the one that was supposed to marry the God King was Vivenna, who was actually the oldest child. And, ever since she was born, that was like her purpose, was to marry the God King, because that would supposedly stop the war between their kingdom and the kingdom of the gods. And so she was supposed to marry the God King, but their father, the king, decides to actually not send Vivenna because she was kind of the favorite child, and he sent Ciri instead, who had never been prepared for that, who knew like not that much about the God King or the other gods or even like their kingdom. And so she's just like thrown in there without much knowledge of what she's getting into. But she goes there and she meets the God King and some of the other gods. And in this world, like the magic system is connected to breaths, which are kind of like a life force that people can take from other people, and they don't like kill the person that they take the breaths from, but that person becomes, I think they call it a drab. They become just like without much color, and also they feel kind of numb. And the person who gets the breaths, they get stronger, and they can also use the breaths to like animate inanimate objects. And the gods, they have like a huge amount of breaths. They're like very powerful because we have so many breaths, and the God King is the one that has the most amount of breaths. And the magic is also connected to like colors and like being able to see colors and create colors. And there's like so much going on in this book that I can't really get into because I feel like that would be spoilery, because like I went into this book not knowing a single thing, just because I want to read all the books in the Cosmere universe, and you know, this was the one that I chose next, but I knew absolutely nothing about it. But I absolutely loved it, and I just loved the characters. Some of them I loved from the beginning, like Ciri, and some of them grew on me, like Vivenna. And my favorite character like was actually one of the gods called Lightsong. He was so funny and he was so cool, and I just loved following every chapter that was in his POV. Like, it was the best time ever. And like I said, the marriage was supposed to stop a war, but there are a lot of people who actually want to start this war, so we also see like all of those tensions and like who is actually behind all of that, like who actually wants to start the war. And yeah, I absolutely loved it. Like, this book gave me the 5-star feelings from the beginning, pretty much. And when I say the beginning, I mean from when I started understanding what was happening, because at first I was very confused, but when I started understanding what was happening, I absolutely loved it. Like, I loved everything. I just, like, the one thing that I guess I could like criticize was that I think the ending was like a bit rushed. Like, for such a huge book, I think the ending was a little bit rushed, but like, it still gave me the 5-star feelings. The few days after I read it, I still couldn't stop thinking about it. And I also love like the world and the magic and everything. Absolutely loved every second of reading this book. And now the next 2 books and the last 2 books are actually the 2 that I couldn't really decide between for like making it into my favorites. And so I'm gonna talk about both. So the first one is American Rapture, and it was a horror book. So as you can see, I do like horror books. And in this one, we're following Sophie, and she grew up in a very religious family. She was like very sheltered. She couldn't really like even watch the news or like read newspapers or anything. And there is like a virus spreading that basically like it started off as kind of the flu, but then the virus mutated and people still like get flu symptoms at first, but then they get like very violent and very sexual, and then they do eventually die from the fever. And things are already like really bad in terms of that virus when Sophie like finally learns about it, and she's, you know, trying to survive that now. And she's also looking for her brother, and she gets like in with a group of people, and we are basically like following them as they try to survive this sort of apocalypse. And this was like very different from what I expected it to be, because like, yes, it was mainly a survival story that was like pretty gory and scary and creepy and violent, but it was also like a coming of age story. And I really loved to follow Sophie as she basically like got to know the world and learned more about everything, honestly, and like how she saw that a lot of the things that she had been taught made no sense, and she couldn't even see like why people would think that they made sense. And I also really liked every character of like that group. I really connected to every single one of them, and so every time that they were in danger, like, I was stressed and I actually cared. And yeah, I absolutely loved it. And actually, the ending and even the author's note made me pretty emotional. And like, it definitely, like, it really caught me by surprise. And I absolutely love it. And the more that I read like survival apocalypse stories, the more I realize that I love them. And so I did love this one for that, but I also loved it in like the coming of age story kind of thing. So yeah, I absolutely love this one. And like, I really didn't expect it to love it as much as I did. So yeah, this one was like definitely a surprise, but it was one of my favorites. And finally, the last book was Where Sleeping Girls Lie, and this was also one of my anticipated releases. And this was a mystery, and we're following Shade as she goes to a prestigious boarding school after being homeschooled her entire life. And when she gets there, she is introduced to her roommate, Elizabeth, who like shows her around the school. And then during Shade's first night there, Elizabeth actually goes missing, and people actually start suspecting that Shade had something to do with it. But at the same time, they don't really care about actually investigating. And then Shade like gets the attention of the group of popular girls, so she also has to deal with that. And she and Elizabeth's best friend are the only people who actually care about figuring out what happened. And so we see them investigating. And there are like a lot of secrets, basically about everyone in that school, or like everyone that we follow. But also there are a lot of secrets about Shade's past and her family. And then like later on, there is a student that is found dead. So that is also something that they have to deal with. And I had, like, before reading this book, I had seen some reviews saying that it was pretty slow, and that made me kind of scared because I do tend to enjoy faster paced books. And I mean, I can definitely confirm that it was slow, but I actually absolutely loved it. And I think that I just loved it that much because I love the main character so much, and I just loved following her. And I mean, I was also invested in the mystery and like in all of the secrets. So like I was really curious and wanted to know what was happening. But definitely it helped that I love the main character and I was just happy following her. And yeah, I was very invested, and I love the reveals, and I love the like main friendships that were formed in this book. And I also kind of liked the sort of romance that was happening, which again is rare for me. So yeah, I absolutely loved it. And yeah, obviously it was one of my favorite books. And so yeah, those are my least favorite, disappointing, and favorite books of 2024. So yeah, that is everything for this video. So thank you so much for watching. I really hope that you have enjoyed it, and if you did, give it a like and subscribe. And I think this is my last video of 2024. So I hope you all had a great 2024, and I hope you have an even better 2025. And yeah, I will talk to you next year. Bye!